Chapter 283 of My Hero Academia is a historic point for the series. It gave us a moment that will be remembered for years to come, and will probably break the internet when it gets animated. Also, not to brag or anything, but I totally predicted this in my Q&A video, which I uploaded yesterday, so if you want to check that out, the link will also be on screen and in the description. The full official chapter will be out on the weekend, which will have way more details than this video here, so this is just a broad overview of what happens for those of you who are interested and impatient like I am. This chapter is titled 75, which is a reference to the fact that Shigaraki was rudely awoken by the heroes when he was at 75% completion, so his body isn't 100% ready yet, and until now we've not really seen any repercussions of that. However, before we can get back to Shigaraki, the chapter actually begins back at the forest with Jiro, Momo, and a bunch of other students from classes 1A and B looking on in horror at the destruction that Gigantomachia is causing. Within the rubble, we see Tokiyami carrying a gravely wounded Hawks, and apparently he's also carrying someone else with Dark Shadow, though the leaks don't specify who this is. Momo looks on and says, "Oh my god!" as she starts to contemplate how they ever thought they were safe, as Makia just continues his rampage. One of the students uses their quirks to float everyone in the air and therefore avoid Makia's destruction, and this is most likely the poltergeist girl from class 1B. Mineta asks the very deep question of whether the hero's actions were correct, whether they did the right thing, and the following panel then focuses on an unconscious Hawks. This moment is designed for us to consider whether Hawks did the right thing in murdering Twice, and I gotta say my personal opinion is that yes he did, because it's an undeniable fact that if Twice was to live, that would only cause more death and more suffering for both innocent people and the heroes. We then see Gigantomachia tearing through the city which he was towering over at the end of chapter 282, and believe me, the destruction is even worse than what you're imagining right now. I don't think Hero Society can ever be the same after this moment. Like, this is 10 times worse than Kamino. We see people on the ground running away, but it's totally pointless as chunks of buildings and cars just come hurtling towards them. Makia roars loudly, and according to the spoilers, he thinks to himself that he feels like he's coming to life. If that translation is accurate, then oh boy, all we know is that whatever that sedative was, it activates the more Makia moves around. Momo said it herself. So, you know, he's moving around quite a bit right now, he's destroying entire cities, and yet instead of feeling sleepy, he feels like he's coming to life. What does that mean? What was this stuff? I will admit that Momo's internal dialogue, it always seems to indicate that she's on the side of the heroes. You know, she never thinks any villainous thoughts or anything like that, but it's just getting very suspicious now. We need answers. We need answers. At this moment, the League of Villains are still just chilling on Makia's back, as Dabi smiles happily at all the destruction. They're now super close to Shigaraki, and we know this because Dr. Garaki is able to hear Makia's roar, and said that Makia was engineered to die for his master. In his words, the Nomu are simply imitations of Gigantomachia, and his willingness to do anything for Shigaraki. The scene then pans to the nearly higher Nomus, still fighting many of the heroes, which is something we hadn't seen for many chapters, and I was starting to wonder if they'd been defeated or something, but no, they are still fighting the heroes. The manga then switches to the main battlefield, where Shoto had just arrived in the last chapter. He uses his ice to slide past Endeavor and apologizes for being late to help, telling his father that he can now, take some time to cool down and avoid overheating. In previous chapters, we saw how Endeavor used the Vanishing Fist, as well as a bunch of other attacks on Shigaraki, and yeah, by this point he was getting a lot weaker. Even Gran Torino said it, so he does need to take a break of some kind. Meanwhile, Deku bravely blasts off straight towards Shigaraki, as both Bakugo and Rocklot shout out that this is a terrible idea, telling him to get away. Midoriya's face is filled with rage, as tears are just streaming down his cheeks, and he replies to Rocklot saying that he doesn't want to run away. I honestly cannot believe there are people out there who just disrespect Deku. Like, how can you tell me this guy isn't one of the most fearless main characters around? As Shigaraki goes to say something, he's unable to complete his sentence because a massive gash just appears on the right side of his body, with blood squirting out from both his chest and his shoulder. Just looking at this panel myself, it almost looked like his right arm is about to fall off. Shiggy yells out in horror as he looks down at his own body, saying to himself that he understands his body wasn't yet complete and that he's been moving above his physical limitations. Deku thinks to himself that Shigaraki's hyper regeneration is probably about to start working, and ponders the fact that, he also has multiple quirks inside One For All. He considers that Gran Torino doesn't have much time left to live, and has flashbacks to his past failures when trying to master the quirk. The translation says that Deku regretfully realizes and accepts that he's not yet ready to use it all at this time, which I think is referring to, the different multiple quirks. I think it's important to remember that Deku already knows what most of the quirks he's going to get are, because All Might gave him this book that kind of detailed pretty much all the quirks except for these second and third users. The scene then shifts again, and this time it's a flashback to Mirko attacking Shigaraki's container, at which point he was at 75% completion. We then see a random hero holding an injured Mirko, telling her to go to sleep. According to the translation though, Mirko replies by saying, "You win if you live," which again, I think this is just her way of saying that she needs to remain conscious right now, but yeah, sometimes it's hard to tell what these rough translations actually mean. Regardless, this is a major death flag for Mirko, as the next panel cuts back to Shigaraki, who uses the 2 fingers on his left hand to hold his damaged right arm in place. He then crouches down to the ground and yells out, "If you touch it, it's over." He makes contact with the ground, and just a wave of decay springs into action, heading straight for the heroes. However, in one of the most iconic moments the series has ever seen, Deku leaps into the sky and uses Black Whip to pull everyone into the air and avoid the destruction. This includes Endeavor, Rocklock, Bakugo, Shoto, literally everyone, and he finally, for the first time, activates his 3rd quirk, which is called Float. This previously belonged to Nana Shimura, who was the 7th user of One For All, and it's the perfect counter to Shigaraki's Decay quirk because it allows him to float in the air like it says. Rocklock is super confused at this moment, and he's like, floating? Like, what is going on? I can empathize with him a lot because if I didn't know about One For All, I'd be pretty damn confused myself as to how this one kid uses all these vastly different powers. Like, what does it look like? He has a Black Whip quirk, he has some sort of superpower quirk, and now he's floating in the air. Like, yeah, that's pretty crazy. We then see Gran Torino, who is somehow still breathing, and he smiles fondly whilst remembering his time flying next to Nana Shimura back in the day. Deku then pulls up in front of Shigaraki and uses his new power to float in the air and says, "In the air, I will stop you. I'll do everything I can." And with that, the chapter ends, and what an ending it was. While this is the first time we've seen Deku use Float, I do wonder if it's the very first time he's actually used it. I mean, All Might did say a while ago that Float would be the next quirk Deku unlocks. So maybe he has some experience with it that we've just not seen. It would definitely be a bonus, coming up against Shigaraki. It would be good to have a little bit of experience to know what you're doing. Anyway, there is no new chapter next week. The manga is on hiatus for 1 week only, so in 2 weeks we will get chapter 284. And remember to smash that subscribe button if you haven't already, and until the next one, peace out.